We're talking more about pawn structure and what kind of trades you could make. Give up a little bit of material, give up a little bit of piece activity to gain a little bit of long-term advantage. How, once you gain that advantage, do you press it and go for the win? Let's watch experts at this game battle in that arena. We are in round 10 of the Cabinets tournament. Fabiano is not messing around here. Alireza, he plays the Najdorf Sicilian, one of the most aggressive lines. And Fabi decides to go with rook to g1. He is signaling he's going to play g4 here. In this tournament right now, Alireza having a bit of a hard time. Fabiano trying to make something happen, trying to make a run for first place here late in the tournament. It's a best of 14 round tournament. And we can see that after just 8 moves, Fabi's got 1, 2, 3, 4 of his pieces out, plus his rook already partially developed. However, white here has already given up his ability to castle kingside, so his king's still here in the middle of the board, maybe slightly weaker king. I'm bringing up our evaluation toolbar here, kind of showing both of those. White still has a little bit of an advantage. Firourza develops here, brings the queen out, and after this castle, bringing the knight out and jumping back, the queen here is attacked. And it looks like Firourza is either going to have to go to kind of like a weird square here or to move back, but he comes up with a little bit more creative way to keep involved. And does he sacrifice his queen? Well, not exactly. This diagonal, the king and queen are lined up, so he's going to regain that material here in a little bit. And after this bishop moves back, we can see that Firourza has done a pretty good job, bringing all of his pieces out. And so updating our evaluation toolbar, let's ignore the fact that the queen's still on the board because we know that's going to come up. Firourza's done a great job. He's really established equality at this point. And after this trade, white is getting a little bit more active. White's in the middle of the board right here. Black here is looking, okay, well, maybe I'm going to be lining up here against your king. There's always the idea of sacrificing and damaging white's pawn structure. And after this, of course, Firourza, that pin no longer exists. He has to take this. And white's pawn structure, he's got doubled pawns right here. But Firourza, maybe he's looking at pushing over here. This last bishop move is Firourza anticipating this f5 push. And we could see white starting to build up a couple of small advantages. This f5 push breaking open the king side over here. Maybe black's king is a little bit weaker. White has a little bit more activity, a little bit more space with all the pawns pushing up here. Let's see if he's able to make something happen. With this knight jump, black's been really holding back. His pawns are in, a really strong position. He's got 2 pawn islands right now. I mean, so does Fabi, but Fabi might be a little bit extended. That could be something to take advantage of. But Firourza lashes out right here with f5. And after the, moral imperative en passant right there, and this recapture, we could see that Firourza's got 1, 2, 3 pawn islands. He used to only have 2. And it's getting a little bit interesting. If white is able to grab this knight right here and black recaptures, now this d6 square is going to be very, very weak. And so Firourza decides to just give up this pawn, trade it for this pawn, try to go for a little bit of activity. This rook's being attacked, but he's able to counterattack this rook, and he moves backwards here, attacking this rook, forcing this trade, but now Firourza's up to 1, 2, 3, 4 pawn islands, which obviously is a bit of a weakness. It makes it really hard for him to hold on to his pawns. However, Fabiano, he's got this weak pawn here on g2 being attacked by the bishop, so maybe it's not the end of the world. We could have a couple of trades maybe. Fabi goes after this weak f5 pawn, and, Firourza's trying to defend, gives up a pawn right here. He doesn't grab that g2 pawn quite right now. I think he's thinking, okay, well, maybe it'll be later, but just remember, if he does take this pawn now, this is a passed pawn right here for black. Could be a pretty big asset, and he starts pushing that pawn. And right here, he pushes his king forward. It's getting a little weird. We have a double attack on the f5 pawn, and black here decides to defend a little bit more passively. This is the final eval we're going to look at. We could see basically everything's going in white's favor. He's just got a little bit of pressure everywhere. You know, this pawn is really his only weakness that he needs to keep an eye out for. It could be a long-term strength for black. He goes in and defends it, but that's not quite the right idea. The better way to defend this right here was actually to move his rook back here, because if the bishop takes, you'd be, you know, walking right into this pin thing, skewer. And so he goes back this way instead. And after this trade, Firourza, you know, he's making a little bit of progress. We have this check, and instead of Firourza jumping straight back here, which is what the commentators thought was going to happen at the time, he jumps over to f7, walks into this pin. He's got to figure out something, and he plays this d1 move right here. We could see that he's got 31 seconds left. This is his 36th move. He's got 4 moves to make in 30 seconds, and we move over right here, and now he's got 3 moves to make 8 more seconds. He has to step out of the way. White gets rid of his only potential weakness right here. a5's Firourza was shaking his head on camera. He really didn't like that he had to make that move so quickly. Maybe not the best move. This push over here, and Firourza's able to make his 40th move. He's attacking this rook, and you know, it looks like maybe he's holding on okay. He's obviously down a pawn, but this d6 pawn is very weak. After this, you know, black, he's going to jump over here. He's attacking this pawn. Really not too much to do, but Firourza tries to be a little bit creative. He always tries to be creative. He gives up a pawn. Now he's down 2 pawns. He's able to regain that pawn, but it's a little bit different now because white has these 2 pawns versus black's 1 pawn. That means that white's going to be able to create a passed pawn at will. And naturally, white says, okay, cool, well, I'll just go ahead and do this. Black says, okay, no, I'm not going to allow you to push here and create that passed pawn. And white's next move here is very cool, and at first glance looks a little bit mysterious. He moves his bishop back to d7. What's the idea behind this move? Well, the idea is now the black king is tied down to this f5 pawn. He's potentially going to just be shuffling back and forth between those 2 squares. And we mentioned that the black bishop doesn't really want to move because he'd create this passed pawn. That's going to be really hard to stop here. We have bishops of the same color. And so black moves over. And what does white do? White jumps back to g1, because what he's going to do is he's going to run over here, grab this pawn. He's going to push here, create this passed pawn, start pushing this pawn forward. Eventually, this bishop might have to move out of the way. He's going to create a second passed pawn. So all that being said, Firourza resigns the game right here. And Fabi here is able to take this win because black's just unable to move any of his pieces. This video is part of a larger series going through how to evaluate positions and what are the big strategic advantages that you can push in your own chess games. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. This is round 11 of the Candidates Tournament. We have a Petrov defense from Ian Nepomniachtchi against Vidit. Vidit beat Hikaru twice in this tournament, so he's no one to mess around with. After we have this voluntarily white damaging his own pawn structure, we have the bishop come in, this queen trade, and rook b1. We see that damage structure allows the rook to be active. So we're trading a damage structure for piece activity. Black here pushes forward, and white's moving forward now too. He plays d4. He's grabbing some space. The theme of this game is going to be, I'm going to grab space. I'm going to see if it's too much space, if I'm overextending myself, or if it's an asset. We have this go back. The knight's not able to move yet because this a2 pawn would be hanging, so he pushes that forward, grabs more space, and now the knight's able to move back. We see on the analysis board, black's king maybe is a little bit safer. White's got a little bit more space, maybe a little bit more piece activity, but it's fairly equal. He pushes even further forward. He pushes over on his H-pawn too. He's on both sides of the board, just kind of inching his way forward. And then we have another pawn push. I think white here actually probably forgot that you are allowed, in fact, to move your pieces. You don't only have to move your pawns. But I think he's going to remember here in just a little bit, moves his bishop forward. With this bishop move, you might be thinking, maybe white is giving up a pawn here, but it doesn't quite work because this rook is still stuck here in the corner. So instead of that, black moves his knight forward to, allow that. And then it looks like, oh, wow, is that a fork? Not quite. We've got this counter strike right here. That would come with check. And so what white does here is gives up his bishop for the pawn because he's going to lose his bishop anyway, then regains that. And we have this position after king to e2. Queens are off the board. We're actually getting kind of closer to an endgame. And we see here black's got a little bit more activity. Obviously, white's still got more space. But white has all these weaknesses. He's got this double isolated pawn structure. I mean, black does have this d6 pawn that is weak, so he goes and defends that immediately. And white, he's like, you know what, I'm not quite done yet. I'm going to keep pushing my way forward. The bishop moves back, and white here gives up this pawn because he wants to damage black's pawn structure and get a little bit more activity for himself. So that happens, and we have this trade. After the rook moves here, he's grabbing, attacking this weak square. The bishop moves back, and we can see black here is a little bit passive. Maybe passive. He's still up a pawn, and so he's got stuff going in his favor as well. The knight moves over, and we are double attacking this weak pawn right here. And black says, you know what? I'm going to kick your bishop back. That does create this almost permanent weakness on d5. It's going to be really hard for black to push this pawn forward, and so that could become an issue here in the future. The black king is all the way back here in the corner. We're getting to an endgame, so that's probably not going to be the best square for it, and we have the white king moving forward. The knight here actually is defending this weak d5 square, because let's just say that black decides, let me grab this pawn right here. Well, white's going to start moving forward, and if the king tries to get out, it's just going to keep happening. This pawn's going to fall. These white pawns are going to go forward, and white's going to, probably win the game. So instead of all that knight, he has to stay where he's at. And black, well, what's black's advantage? You guys got to push your own advantages. That's going to be that outside passed pawn. So he's going to start pushing it. And right now, white needs to figure out, how am I going to keep in front of these pawns and defend it? That's going to really be the theme here of what happens. And okay, cool, I'm going to double attack this pawn. And black says, well, you know what? I got two of these pawns. So yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out. I'm going to get rid of my weakness here on d5. And okay, now I've got 4 pawn islands, 1, 2, 3, 4 different pawn islands, but I'm still up a pawn, and I still have this outside passed pawn on a5. White here tries to come back. Now he's double attacking the c5 square. Black stubbornly defends with his rook moving back, and white's like, okay, cool, I got to get active. Maybe I can get my rook all the way up here and kind of, start creating some problems. Black here, okay, cool, well, I've got these 2 squares covered, that square covered. There should be no infiltration. And so white instead says, well, I'll go after this other weak pawn. You've got a lot of weak pawns in your camp. I need to do something here. So he attacks it, defends, attacks, doesn't go for a repeat, moves back this way, reintroduces the attack here on that pawn. And again, black, instead of defending, decides to counterattack this bishop, has to move over, counterattacks this pawn, and white defends. White's getting a little bit nervous. We'll see here in a second. He does decide to move to d2, but that really opens up, well, what happens with this pawn when it keeps pushing forward? And that's immediately what happens as soon as that bishop moves off the diagonal. Again, we have a double attack here. Black, again, just defends. No problem. We have the black rook go behind his passed pawn. That's the best place for your rooks to be. And white here says, okay, cool, well, I'm going to go here and defend. And as we see here, a little bit earlier, we thought, well, maybe white's king's going to end up all the way over here because the black king was in the corner. Now we have the white king all the way on the edge of the board, and the black king is making its way forward. What's going to happen here? We have this pawn push, okay, well, we have to stop this infiltration of the black king. With this bishop being attacked, white decides to counter-attack this rook. The rook moves back, and we are defending the bishop this way. Black pushes forward, and we have the king getting even closer into the action. The bishop moves back. The king moves even farther forward. We are attacking this rook, this knight right here, and we decide to counter-attack this. And the knight captures. We could see that the white king here is stuck on the edge of the board. We've got this check right here. This square is being taken by this pawn. This square is being taken by this knight as well. So it's going to get really, really interesting. If the king decides to start running this way, we've got this check, which would, take away this square as well. So it's going to get pretty scary. Best move here for white here is actually to bail out. And to bail out here would be to capture this knight, recapture, capture the rook, capture the knight, and now we'd have, 2 pawns versus 2 pawns and bishops of the same color, but the black king is much better than the white king, and black has this passed pawn. So it's rough because black would be playing for a win, but it would be the best option for white to defend. Instead of that, he decides to move forward this way. The rook infiltrates even further into this position, doesn't want to allow that simplification. And we have this check, which is the nail in the coffin. Really what white needed to do when you're getting pressed and you're behind in your games, you need to create your own counterplay. And that counterplay in this case would have been moving over here, going after this G6 pawn. And actually black's best response to that would be to go after this rook first and then to go after some sort of a repetitive check. Instead of that, the knight moves back, checks, and we've got the rook moving over, and we have, with this pawn push, we're creating all sorts of discovery checks once this rook moves. There's a lot of pressure here on white. He decides to give a check here. The knight's moving out of the way. He wants to create more room for what? For his pawn to move further forward. And it's really going to be rough because, we could just grab this knight and go up a knight, but what's better than taking a minor piece? Well, let's go ahead and just promote. And in this position right here, Vidit Gujrathi resigns the game and Jan takes down this one. Hopefully you're seeing what little nuggets we can pull from these top-level chess players to incorporate into your own games. I'm going to continue to do that as we continue to cover more of these games from the Candidates Tournament. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you around here soon.